The Democracy Institute was one of the few organizations to predict that Donald Trump was going to win this election. And they cited sort of the wisdom of the crowds as well as secret Trump voters. Recently on Mark Levin's show, Patrick Basham of the Democracy Institute said that Joe Biden's win was statistically implausible, not statistically impossible. And he doesn't talk about fraud, or he might have, but one of the things he cites is that there are several metrics which have a 100% success rate. Things like Google searches and more silly predictors like how many Halloween masks were sold. All of these gag predictions, cookie sales and mask sales, then the more silly ones like Google searches, party registration, all predicted Donald Trump would win. So this pollster says Joe Biden defied all of these bellwether metrics. It's rather astounding, isn't it? Now, there certainly is evidence of fraud. There are complaints right now from Donald Trump recently tweeted, Georgia's not going to be doing signature verification like a legit one. They've done like these little risk assessment audits, and now they're certifying. And even though the state legislature is saying we want an emergency session, he says no. And my only question is why? We can certainly drag this out as long as we need to. Dude, it's only a few months. I got no issue. Let them sit down, let them have their conversation and dispute what they want to dispute. The worst possible thing for any of us is going to be not resolving these issues and having establishment elites poo-poo the people and say, we don't care about you. We don't care about what you think. We don't care about what you see. We don't care about any evidence. We are not going to dig into this. I am not saying Donald Trump is correct. I am not saying that Joe Biden won. I am saying that there are certainly more than enough anomalies being brought up that freak people out that we should be addressing. And if Trump says, do a hard signature audit, well, we get the left going, of course they already did. They did scanned recounts, okay? And not only that, I'll tell you this. If Trump is unsatisfied, just do it again. I'm not kidding. It is better that we spend exorbitant amounts of money wasting our time than doing nothing and getting, chaos and clashes and violence in the streets. In my previous segment, I'll issue an update and we'll call it a correction. We had a guy, someone threw two explosives into his home. And he doesn't know why, but he is a very prominent, ardent Trump supporter in the community with a big old Trump flag. The explosives used were typical of Antifa. We've seen people have their homes burned down and there was graffiti. So maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. Occam's razor. I don't play conspiracy theories. Probably the left attacking Trump supporters. The Secretary of State of Michigan said armed Trump supporters were outside of her home screaming, demanding she overturn the results. I said I didn't know if I believed it. So here's the update and the correction. There is video of these people outside her home protesting. Now, whether or not they were threatening her, I think that's her bias and all that stuff, but the people really were there. We need to simmer things down. And yes, if Joe Biden won and he won amazingly in defiance of all of the odds, then please, for the love, for the people of this country, to make sure we do not spiral out of control, just let's go through the motions. We'll do what we have to do, no matter how long it takes. And then if we get to the 20th and we've done 17 audits, we can say, what more do you want? It's better than doing nothing and being a snooty elitist. Which brings me to our resident snooty elitist, Sam Harris. Okay, maybe that's a little bit harsh, but Sam has got a blind, faith-like hatred for Donald Trump. I need to highlight this. I absolutely do, because this is the fundamental question here. And we'll read about the pollster and his explanation. Sam Harris says, why do so many Americans think the election was stolen? Linking to a New York Times op-ed. Well, Sam isn't saying much himself. He's linking to the story from the New York Times, basically trying to debunk or call out people and say, oh, it's emotional and things like that. Well, let me tell you, first and foremost, the first and biggest reason why Americans think the election was stolen is, well, actually, no. Let me just throw it to Jeffrey Miller, who responded. Jeffrey Miller, of course, is an intellectual dark web type personality, psychology professor, very smart individual. He said, for what it's worth, maybe when conservatives see systemic anti-conservative bias in news, academia, publishing, movies, TV, and social media, which is all obvious yet denied by mainstream news, they might take the Bayesian bet that there could be anti-conservative bias in election systems. Sam's response: but they are, in many of the relevant cases, attacking Republican election officials as though these officials were incentivized to perpetrate or conceal a massive fraud in favor of Democrats. Sam exposing his ignorance on the issue. And look, I got to be honest. Sam has what people would refer to as Trump derangement syndrome. Here's a story. Georgia election officials urged Trump to stop inspiring people to commit potential acts of blah, blah, blah. This is a tweet out from Sam Harris. Sam Harris, Barr says Justice Department hasn't uncovered any fraud. Sam very much has what we refer to as Trump derangement syndrome. The reason why I want to highlight Sam is that his response to Jeffrey Miller clearly shows his ignorance of the matter. Trump supporters don't like Republicans for the most part. It's kind of a vehicle by which Trump was elected and which they tacitly support for the past several years. But they've repeatedly called out Republicans in name only and gone after Republican figures who aren't on the Trump train. They don't like Republicans. They don't. And this is, look, something I've known for a long time when I went to these rallies and met Trump supporters. In 2015 and 16, I went to dozens of Trump rallies. I was covering it in my capacity as a journalist. And I was talking to people, and many of them said they never voted before or they were independents. Some of them were former Democrats. They don't like Republicans. Sam doesn't get it. What I find particularly fascinating about Sam Harris's Trump derangement syndrome is that he was involved in this very famous Bill Maher segment where he was talking about the danger of the ideas within Islam that are anti-liberal. They mentioned other religions, too. They weren't singling out the religion for the religion's sake. They were saying the ideas that many of these religions hold. Ben Affleck famously snapped, shaking his head all angry, saying, "You're racist." Yes, derangement syndrome. Like violent, angry outbursts of people who just can't accept it. That's what Sam Harris does. Now, he's not as bad as Ben Affleck is, but it's remarkable to me that Sam couldn't spend even a few minutes to Google search why it is Trump supporters don't have faith in the results. Aside from the fact that there is video of people pulling out ballot boxes from under tables in the late hours of the night after everyone has already left or were told to go home, according to 2 sworn affidavits, and then counting in violation of election law when there were no observers present. It's not proof, okay? But it is shocking to many people that all of these things happen. And if you come out and say these things are normal, my only response is then it's a good thing Trump is shining a light and getting us to deal with this because these are vulnerabilities to our election system, right? Well, Sam, let me break it down for you. Patrick Basham explains why Biden victory not statistically impossible, but statistically implausible. They say, President-elect Joe Biden defied key non-polling metrics to defeat Trump in a way that is not statistically impossible, but it's statistically implausible. Pollster Patrick Basham told Fox News' Life, Liberty, and Levin in an interview airing Sunday night. Basham, the founding director of the Democracy Institute, explained to host Mark Levin that there are a dozen or more of these metrics that have a 100% accuracy rate in terms of predicting the winner of the presidential election. That doesn't mean it's impossible, but I will also state in the months and the years coming up to this election, I also was tracking a lot of these metrics and reporting on them. Notably, voter registration in Pennsylvania predicted an overwhelming win for Republicans. And then what? It didn't happen. And it was confusing to basically everyone. Every single metric was wrong, but the polls, which are opinion polls, predicted Biden was going to defeat Trump resoundingly, was going to defeat all the Republicans. So think about how weird this is. You have hard metrics like we're not asking people their opinions when we look how many registered Republican. We're saying that's a data point and fact. When we're asking people their opinions on who they're going to vote for, that's hard to gauge. We're looking at metrics. We're looking at margins of error. So why is it that the polling was all wrong and all of the data points, the predictors, the Bellwether predictors, were also wrong? It's very strange, isn't it? It doesn't seem to make sense. They say those metrics, according to Basham, include, quote, party registration trends, how the candidates did in their respective presidential primaries, the number of individual donations, and how much enthusiasm each candidate generated in the opinion polls. And I'm going to stop there and also say we had one university, I believe it was in California. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it was Irvine. No, I don't think it was. We had one university say, wisdom of the crowd predicts a Trump victory. People were asked, who are your friends going to vote for? Democracy Institute said the secret Trump voter, which we now know exists. There's also mask sales, which is a joke. Every election say, how many Halloween masks were sold? That usually predicts who's going to win. This time around, it was Donald Trump. Cookie sales. There was a bakery that was doing cookies and said they always, when they sell the cookies, the winning presidential candidate usually sells more cookies, and it was resoundingly Trump. What happened now? Everything was wrong. Man, you think people, and guess what? It's not just these metrics. It's 18 of 19 bellwether counties were wrong. The bellwether states were wrong. Now, come on, you mean to tell me, okay, fine, whatever. But listen, is it possible? Of course it is. Are people going to be shaking their head and saying, I want to dig into this one because this is weird? Yeah. Not only that, but you have, thousands of sworn affidavits alleging fraud right now? My friends, witness testimony is evidence. It is not definitive proof. We use it in murder trials and criminal cases all the time. It doesn't mean the witnesses are correct. It just means you're going to have to look into it. We have a video coming out of the State Farm Arena in Georgia, and it needs to be investigated. We have video of people, literal surveillance video showing them counting ballots for an hour with no observers in violation of election law. And this stuff, all of it adds up. And then you get Trump supporters saying, I dispute, I object. Sam Harris can't understand that. And many other hoity-toity establishment elites, people with Trump derangement syndrome, instead of actually coming out of the house and saying, can I ask you some questions to better understand why you feel this way? They just say, what dumb people. Why are they mad at Republicans? Sam is surprised. This is what's funny. He's surprised that the Trump supporters are criticizing Republicans. Have you even listened to a single Trump supporter? They rag on Republicans all the time. You know, I did a video once called Republicans Are Too Stupid to Deal with the Social Media Censorship Issue to Save Their Own, careers. And all the Trump supporters are like, yup. I put out a tweet and I'll say pardon Assange and Snowden. And not all Trump supporters, but many say they exposed the deep state. Yes. Well, that flies in the face of what the Republicans are saying. The Trump supporters are the party of Trump. And the media calls them Trumpists or Trumpism. So Sam really needs to learn how to read. So here's what they say. In 2016, all of these metrics, all of these different metrics I mentioned, they all indicated strongly that Donald Trump would win against most of the public polling. That was again the case in 2020. So if we are to accept that Biden won against the trend of all these non-polling metrics, it not only means that one of these metrics was inaccurate for the first time ever, it means that each one of these metrics was wrong for the first time and at the same time as all of the others. Truly amazing. Another anomaly of the 2020 election, Basham told Levin, is the fact that Trump performed better in many key voting metrics than he did 4 years earlier. If you look at the results, you see how Donald Trump improved his national performance over 2016 by almost 20%. No incumbent president has ever lost a re-election bid if he's increased his vote total. Obama went down by 3.5 million votes between 2008 and 2012, but still won comfortably. If you look at those results, you see that Donald Trump did very well, even better than 4 years earlier, with the white working class. He held his own with women and suburban voters against all of most of the polling expectations, did very well with Catholics, improved his vote among Jewish voters, continued Basham, who detailed his incredulity in an article published in the American edition of The Spectator. He had the best minority performance for a Republican since Richard Nixon in 1960, doing so well with African Americans and, importantly, with Hispanics. In fact, Basham suggested, Trump's performance was so impressive that if anyone asked 100 observers who were sequestered for the actual election night and had been given the vote breakdown by demographic group who they thought won the election, 99 at least out of these 100 independent, well-informed observers would say, well, obviously Trump. Basham also cited what he called a historically low ballot rejection rate for absentee and mail-in ballots, saying, rejection rates, which in the primaries earlier this year was well into the double digits, and which historically have often been very, very high in these key swing states, or at least in the key swing counties. We're seeing rejection rates of less than 1%, often very close to zero, he said. Given the increase in absentee balloting and the lack of experience that most of the new voters and those doing the counting would have with those ballots, it is implausible, to put it politely, that figure would be as low as it was. I'll go one step further. Not possible. I'm sorry, it's not. Okay, fine. I guess it is, but saying implausible is, I'm sorry, it's astronomical. I had been covering this, the New York Times, the Washington Post, various university research studies talking about, first and foremost, with more mail-in voting and absentee. This reported 2012 by the New York Times. We see more rejection, between 1% and 2%. Many were worried, something I had covered extensively, that with first-time voters and first-time mail-in voters, we were going to see a much higher rate of rejection. But for some reason, it's lower than ever. These things don't add up. I am not saying Trump won. I am saying if you can't answer these, you will have 74 million people in this country saying there is no legitimate election. Where does that bring us in 2022? And where does that bring us in 2024? Chaos and violence. And like I mentioned, my earlier segment was about a guy who had a mortar shell, 2 of them, thrown into his home, blowing up. We don't know why, but he's a Trump supporter and he believes it was politically motivated. And Antifa uses mortar shell artillery fireworks as one of their principal weapons. We also had the Secretary of State in Michigan saying people were outside her home in the wee hours of the morning or late at night, demanding that she overturn the results and give them to Trump. Because there are legitimate reasons why people do not believe this election was legitimate. Now, there certainly are, in my opinion, a lot of crazy people saying a lot of crazy things. Again, I didn't say Trump won or it was rigged or anything like that. Of course, they'll try and claim that that is what I'm saying simply for not being a tribalist. And the tribal right, wow, I'll tell you this. Go over to the Donald.win. Check out, it's now one of the biggest websites in the country, which is one of the top 500. That's huge, massive, large community. And they are adamant Trump won and it was clearly stolen. I believe there is evidence to suggest that there was a rigged election, but not definitive proof. Evidence to suggest doesn't mean it is a fact. It just means, hey, wait a minute. How come these people were counting, after everyone was told to leave and these ballots, like what's going on here, right? How about the sworn affidavits? How about this mathematical and statistical anomalies? And some of these forensic audits have turned up strange anomalies. No, we had there was a Republican woman in Michigan who noticed that a Republican district turned blue and she didn't believe it. So she demanded they look, and turns out, oopsie, 6,000 votes went to Biden. We have many sworn affidavits from people saying, I saw military votes for Biden and I don't believe it. And the left laughs at them saying, that's why sometimes people don't like Trump. That's true. But that was the basis by which we discovered a 6,000 vote swing in error that went to Biden when it was supposed to be for Trump. That to me says, okay, well, check it. Do a signature verification and let's cold call people. Oh, wait. We did actually do that to a great extent with Matt Brainard's voter integrity project. He had several call centers calling voters, asking them, and he found massive discrepancies and actual evidence of widespread voter fraud, which is 20,000 or so votes of people who are registered in 2 different states and recorded as having voted in 2 different states. Either it's fraud because they voted twice or someone voted in their name. Sorry, resistance type leftists. It's a fact. It exists. It doesn't mean Trump lost because of it, but it must be investigated. Could you imagine if someone like Sam Harris, who goes and preaches about how he's so upset over these religions and then has to push back from the SJW types of Ben Affleck, actually talked to Trump supporters and did research? Look at his blind faith-based hatred for Donald Trump. My understanding is he's improved quite a bit, but he puts out these generic tweets, 1.4 million followers. And I just wonder why it is that someone who claims to be a critical thinker can't just read one story. You can't Google search one thing or watch for just 1 hour a Fox News program to see what they're thinking. Because it's quite simple. As Jeffrey Miller put it, widespread bias exists in media, academia, basically every institution across government, from even Republicans to Democrats. The bias exists in a variety of ways. It's not just against conservatives or Republicans or whatever. It's heterodox individuals. It's unorthodox individuals. It's anti-establishment individuals. So when you see this and you're beaten over the head repeatedly every single day. Then they come out and say, all of that weird stuff that's coming out, like sworn affidavits and hard evidence, ignore it. Trust us. This time, Trump supporters are going to say, no, we're not going to just trust you. And you can't, because we need evidence. So here's where any sane human being would be, in my opinion. Okay, I guess you could be a tribalist and be sane. So to be fair, tribalists on the right are adamant that Trump won. My issue with that is, while we do have evidence of widespread voter fraud coming from the Voter Integrity Project, and more than just these people who voted twice, there's people who voted even though they moved and changed their addresses, and there are people who listed corporate commercial addresses with apartment units. Clearly, that is not legitimate, okay? So it looks like we have evidence of widespread fraud. We have one individual is actually charged 135 times for getting the infirm to vote. And there are accusations coming out of Pennsylvania where thousands of ballots, all of the same signatures and handwriting, coming out of nursing homes. Many people are saying this is, it's happening. I'm not going to go from there and say I know for a fact the election was stolen from Trump. And what I mean by that is the fraud exists to an extent that it was stolen from Donald Trump. I will say, however, that there are strong signs indicating that. And what we need now is to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Unfortunately, that's not possible because we don't have the time or the resources to deal with 150 million votes and to actually go through all of this stuff. But when you have the Bellwether states all being wrong, the Bellwether counties being 90-something% wrong, and you have all of the non-polling metrics being wrong, all happening for the first time, you expect me to sit here and just believe everything is okay? I have no problem saying it's not been definitively proven. And I have no problem saying it probably is impossible to definitively prove because we don't have the time or energy, and the election is the deadline for safe harbor is tomorrow. But it certainly means if you do not solve this, if you do not investigate this, you're going to have 74 million people who say that they believe beyond a reasonable doubt, based on everything we've seen, this was a rigged election. For me, is it beyond a reasonable doubt? Honestly, not really. But I will tell you that there is evidence that extends quite far into saying something isn't right here. You don't need 500,000 people in a grand conspiracy. You need only 10, a small group of people. There's a piece of audio going around where there's a woman palming a USB stick, and then you can hear what someone say, we're probably going to get caught. I don't know if it was her. I don't know what she was referring to. Maybe she was talking about sneaking out for lunch. But Trump supporters hear that and they say, combine that with everything else, rigged election. It must be investigated and dealt with. They're not going to do it, are they? And then what? It's going to be chaos, I guess. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. on my main channel. We got a bunch of major developments today in lawsuits. The Republicans in Georgia are blocking Trump. In order to check that out, first, subscribe, like, hit the notification bell, then go up to the address bar and type this in, youtube.com/TIMCAST, Timcast. Then press enter. Okay, I'm assuming you're still hearing me because you didn't do that, but if you do, you will see my main channel. So I'll leave it there. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all in the next segment, 4 p.m., youtube.com/Timcast. Seriously, just type it in the address bar and press enter, and I will see you all then.